Mom, it's just a formality, my son said. They brought me papers supposedly for utility bills. But hidden in there was a renunciation of my land worth over $200 million. I almost signed it. I was sweeping the kitchen floor that morning, the radio humming low with some old Hank Williams tune, when I heard them. My children, my own flesh and blood, talking in hushed voices just beyond the porch. They thought I couldn't hear, that the creak of the screen door and the steady hum of the cicadas would cover their words. But a mother's ears are sharp, even at 72. 200 million, my son whispered, his voice full of something I couldn't quite name. Excitement, maybe. Greed, more likely. I froze, broom midair. 200 million? I leaned closer, the handle of the broom pressed against my chest. His sister answered. They'll wire the first advance once Mom signs. The developers want to break ground before winter. We can't let this drag. My heart thudded so loud I swore they might hear it. $200 million. For what? For my land. The land their grandfather had plowed with his bare hands. The same soil where I had planted corn and beans. Where I buried my husband under the big oak because he said he wanted to rest close to the earth he loved. That land wasn't numbers on a page. It was blood, sweat, and memory. I pressed my palm against the windowsill, steadying myself. They were talking about selling it just like that. My children. My babies who had played hide-and-seek between the hay bales, who had caught fireflies in mason jars when the nights were soft and long. Now they were bargaining it away like strangers. The shock wasn't the money. Lord knows I've lived my whole life with little more than enough to get by. No, the blow was hearing the eagerness in their voices, the way they spoke as if I were already gone, as if my name had already slipped off the deed. I pushed the door open, making it creak on purpose this time. They turned to me, startled like children caught stealing cookies. What's this talk I hear about money? I asked, my voice steady though my knees trembled. Oh, nothing, Mama, my daughter said too quickly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. We're just discussing business opportunities. On my porch? I asked. In whispers. No one answered. My son shoved his hands deep into his pockets, staring at the floorboards like a guilty schoolboy. My daughter cleared her throat and said something about needing to pick up the grandkids. They left fast, their car tires spitting gravel down the drive. I stood there a long while after, the sun beating down on my shoulders, the broom still clutched in my hand. I thought of my husband, how he'd carved our initials into the barn door the summer we married. I thought of the nights I'd sat up with feversome children, praying under that same roof. And I thought of the dirt beneath my shoes, the rows of beans I once planted with such care. Was all of that just a number to them now? 200 million? When the dust settled from their car, I walked slow across the yard, the hem of my dress brushing through the dry grass. The air smelled faintly of cut hay, sweet and sharp. Everything looked the same, yet it all felt different, tainted somehow. Inside, I brewed myself a pot of coffee, though my hands shook too much to pour it straight. The steam rose up in curls and I stared at it, wondering when exactly my children had stopped seeing this land as home and started seeing it as currency. I sipped the bitter coffee and listened to the silence of the house. It wasn't the comfortable silence I'd known all these years, the kind filled with the ticking clock and the rustle of curtains. This was the hollow kind, heavy and cold. I looked out the window at the fields stretching far as the eye could see. They'd once called this place worthless, too far from the city, too quiet, too plain. But now that the metropolis had crept close with its towers and its traffic, suddenly the soil was gold beneath their feet. And they were ready to sell it, with or without me. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen table, steadying myself once more. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but one thing was certain. I wasn't about to let my children erase the story of this land without a fight. It was a Tuesday morning when my son came by, early enough that I still had my hair in curlers. He never visits unannounced. That alone should have set off alarms in my head, but I was glad to see him. Foolish me. "Morning, Mama," he said, walking in without knocking, holding a folder under his arm. He smelled faintly of aftershave and coffee, that Rush City scent. "Got some papers for you to sign. Nothing big. Just utility stuff." I wiped my hands on my apron and tried to smooth my hair. "Utilities?" I asked. He nodded too quickly. "Yeah, city requires updated records. Gas, water, they want everything streamlined now that development's spreading this way." He laid the folder on the kitchen table. I noticed he didn't look me in the eye as he said it. The table still bore scratches from when he and his sister used to do their homework there. Pencil marks, little carvings of initials. He used to draw lopsided tractors while I stirred stew on the stove. Now he slid the papers across the same wood, his fingers tapping impatiently. "Just sign here," he said, flipping to the last page. I pulled the glasses from my apron pocket, the ones with the little crack in the frame, and perched them on my nose. The paper looked official enough. Stamps, seals, long words that blurred together. I ran my finger down the lines, the way I always do when I don't want to miss something. "City sure likes their paperwork," I muttered. "Yeah, Mama, they do," he said, his voice tight. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the clock on the wall. "I've got another meeting in an hour. Just need your signature so I can drop this off." I almost signed. The pen was already in my hand. My eyes were tired, and I trusted him. He was my boy. Why would he trick me? But something, call it instinct, call it the voice of my husband whispering in my ear, made me pause. My finger traced a line in the middle of the page. A phrase tucked neatly between paragraphs of legal jargon. Authorization for change of land designation. My breath caught. I read it again. Change of land designation. "What's this mean?" I asked, pointing to the phrase. He leaned over quickly, his hand covering part of the page. "Oh, that's just standard language, Mama. Don't worry about it." I pulled the paper back, sharper than I meant to. Standard language, my foot. I may be old, but I can still read. His jaw tightened. "Mama, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I set the pen down. My heart thumped against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "Why would utilities care about land designation?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, lips pressed thin, a flicker of something hard in his eyes. For a moment he looked like a stranger. Finally, he sighed and pushed his chair back. "Fine. Don't sign it now. Think about it." "But Mama," he leaned close, his voice low, heavy with warning. "Opportunities like this don't come twice. You don't want to stand in the way." He left the papers on the table, along with a silence that filled the whole kitchen. I listened to his truck roar down the road until it was swallowed by distance. I sat there a long while, staring at the folder. My coffee had gone cold. My hand shook when I reached for it, not from age but from something else, betrayal maybe. That night, I tucked the folder into the bottom drawer of the old hutch. I couldn't bring myself to shred it, not yet. I wanted it near where I could study it again in better light. Later, as I washed dishes, I kept seeing his face, the way he avoided my eyes, the edge in his voice when I questioned him. This was my son. The boy who once begged me for an extra cookie, who cried when the neighbor's dog nipped his heel. And now he was sliding papers across my kitchen table, trying to trick me into signing away my rights. When I went to bed that night, I pulled the quilt to my chin and stared at the ceiling beams. My husband had nailed those boards himself, his hammer echoing across the valley all those years ago. I wondered what he would say if he'd heard our son today. I turned on my side and shut my eyes tight, but sleep didn't come easy. Because no matter how I tried to push it away, one thought pressed hard against me. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the first backstab, and something told me it wouldn't be the last. The morning was damp. The kind where the grass sticks wet against your shoes no matter how careful you walk. I was on the porch sweeping leaves when I saw Earl, my old neighbor, shuffling up the lane. Earl's been around almost as long as I have, stooped back, ball cap with sweat stains, boots worn thin. He waved a folded newspaper at me like it was something urgent. "Morning, Ruth," he called. "You seen today's Tribune?" I shook my head. "Haven't had time yet." He climbed the steps slow, breathing heavy. "Well, you better take a look at this." He opened the paper with a rustle and laid it flat on the porch rail. There it was in bold letters. Construction of new business district to begin this year. At first I thought I'd misread. But then my eyes slid down to the map printed under the headline. Roads, parcels, little shaded areas marked Phase 1. My stomach dropped. That shaded land? Every last acre was mine. "Earl." My voice came out thin like it didn't belong to me. This can't be right." He scratched his jaw, his eyes full of sympathy. "I figured you hadn't heard. Paper says the city council approved permits last month. Developers already signed contracts. Whole thing's set to break ground before Christmas." I gripped the rail to steady myself. The world tilted like the porch boards had come loose under my feet. But no one asked me. This is my land. Earl's eyes softened. "Ruth, I think someone already made a deal behind your back." I shook my head, refusing the thought though it clung to me like burrs. My children. My babies. They wouldn't, no they couldn't. Yet my son's papers flashed in my mind. That sly phrase about land designation. My hand tightened on the railing. Earl cleared his throat. "I don't mean to meddle, but when I saw that map, I knew I had to bring it over. Figured you had a right to know." I looked at him, this man who had helped me mend fences in storms, who'd shared sweet corn when crops were good. And I thought of my own children whispering deals, sliding contracts. The shame of it made my chest ache. I folded the paper with stiff fingers, the ink smudging on my hands. "Thank you, Earl." He patted my arm gently, the way folks do when there's nothing more they can say. "You take care now. And don't let him push you around." When he left, I carried the newspaper inside, laying it flat on the kitchen table beside my cold coffee. I studied the map until my eyes blurred. Roads cutting through the fields. Parking lots where the orchard once stood. Office towers swallowing the meadow. I pressed my hand against the paper as though I could hold the land down, keep it from slipping away. But the truth was there in black and white. My children had already sold me out. The day passed in a haze. I tried to tend the garden, but my hands shook too badly to weed. I tried to mend a torn shirt, but the needle pricked my finger twice. All I could see was that map, my land carved up like a carcass. Toward evening, I pulled out the old photo albums. I don't know why. Maybe I needed reminding of what this place meant. There was my husband holding up a pitchfork taller than he was, grinning with dirt on his face. There were the children, barefoot in the creek, hair stuck to their foreheads, their laughter frozen in sepia. And now those same children wanted to flatten it all for skyscrapers and shopping plazas. By nightfall, I sat at the kitchen table again, the newspaper spread before me. The house creaked in the summer heat, and the cicadas sang their endless song. But inside me, everything was quiet, cold. I thought of my husband's words, spoken long ago one evening when we sat on the porch after a long day's work. "This land will outlive us, Ruth. It'll carry our name if we take care of it." But now it seemed my own family was ready to erase that name. I folded the paper once more and tucked it into the drawer beside the contract my son had left. Both sat there like snakes waiting to strike. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew this much. The fight for my land had already begun. The barn had always been a place of memory for me. Built by my husband's own hands, it smelled of old hay and motor oil, of dust warmed by sunlight slipping through the boards. After Earl showed me that newspaper, I couldn't sit still. Something itched at the back of my mind. If my children had already sold me out, I needed to dig, to see if there was anything left in the old records that could help me. So I pulled on my work gloves and made my way to the barn. The doors groaned like they hadn't been opened in years, though I still kept a few tools inside. Dust motes swirled in the slanted light as I stepped in. My footsteps echoed on the worn planks. Along the back wall were shelves sagging under the weight of boxes and crates. Some were filled with mason jars, others with rusted nails and bolts. And on the highest shelf, nearly hidden behind a coil of rope, sat a yellowed folder. I don't know what made me reach for it. Maybe instinct, maybe the Lord himself. I dragged over an old stool, wobbling as I climbed, and pulled it down. The paper crackled like it might crumble in my hands. I carried it to the workbench, brushing away sawdust before laying it flat. My heart thudded as I opened it. Inside were brittle pages, typed on thin onion skin paper, the kind they used back in the 70s. Across the top in bold were the words, State of Redacted Department of Conservation Agreement. My breath caught. I leaned closer. It was a contract, an official one stamped and signed by state officials in 1973. And the words were clear. The land comprising parcel My Land was designated as a protected environmental zone due to its wetlands, migratory bird nesting areas, and groundwater resources. I sat down hard on the stool. Protected zone. That meant no skyscrapers, no office towers, no bulldozers tearing up the fields. If this paper was still valid, then their whole shiny development plan was impossible. But the folder was in rough shape. Pages water-stained, corners chewed by mice. And I wasn't sure if one copy tucked in an old barn would be enough. I needed confirmation. City archives, maybe. I turned another page, my hands trembling. There was a signature at the bottom, an official from the State Department of Conservation. I didn't recognize the name, but it was there along with the old seal. My husband must have signed too back when they first proposed it. He probably tucked the folder away, thinking it would never matter. I pressed my palm against the pages, feeling the weight of time between my fingers. For a moment, hope flickered in me. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as they thought. The barn creaked as the wind picked up outside, rattling the tin roof. I gathered the folder against my chest like it was a newborn, my heart pounding. But then doubt crept in. My children were already knee-deep with the developers. They'd laugh if I waved old papers at them. They'd say it was outdated, invalid. I'd need proof, official records, duplicates stored in government files. Still, the thought of marching into that city council chamber with this folder in my hands gave me a thrill I hadn't felt in years. I tucked the folder into an old flour sack, tied it shut, and carried it back to the house. My hand shook as I placed it in the bottom drawer of my hutch, beside the newspaper and my son's phony contract. 3 snakes now coiled together. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning. I spread out the folder again, reading each line slowly. Words blurred as my eyes watered. Not from age this time, but from the thought of my husband. He must have known this paper mattered. Why hadn't he told me? Or maybe he had, and I'd forgotten, too busy with children and harvests. Either way, here it was resurfacing just when I needed it most. I imagined the developers, smug in their suits, thinking they'd already carved up my land. I imagined my children, counting imaginary millions, whispering behind my back. And I imagined their faces when they realized I held a trump card. But then another thought chilled me. If they discovered I had this folder, what would they do to stop me? My children weren't the same little ones who used to chase fireflies in the yard. They were hard now, sharp. Money had done that to them. I shut the folder, blowing out the lamp. Tomorrow, I decided, I would find someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe the archives office, who could tell me if this contract still had teeth. As I lay in bed, I heard the night sounds, the crickets, the owls, the distant hum of the highway that hadn't been there when we first bought the land. And under it all, my heart beat steady. full of something I hadn't felt in a long while. Not fear. Not grief. Fight. It didn't take long for word to spread. I hadn't told a soul outside of Earl, but somehow my children found out I had discovered something in the barn. Maybe they saw the lamp burning late into the night. Maybe one of them had snooped when I left the kitchen drawer unlocked. However it happened, they knew. My daughter came first. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon with a pie in one hand, and that smile she puts on when she wants something. I set the pie on the counter, but I didn't cut into it. "Mama," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "I heard you've been digging through old boxes again." I kept my back to her, rinsing the coffee pot. "And what if I have?" She came closer, her heels clicking on the linoleum. "You don't need to stress yourself with old papers. They don't mean anything. Just junk." I turned then, wiping my hands on a towel. "This junk was signed by the state back in '73. Says this land is protected. You know what that means." For a second I saw a flicker in her eyes, fear or maybe anger. But she covered it fast. "Mama, listen. Things have changed. No one's going to honor some moldy contract you pulled out of the barn. Developers know how to handle these things. It's better if you just—" She stopped herself, biting her lip. "Better if I just what?" I asked. She smiled again, too wide this time. "Better if you let us take care of it. We'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll never have to worry about bills again." I stared at her. My own daughter talking to me like I was some tenant in my own home. That night, I locked the folder in a trunk under my bed. My hand shook as I turned the key. I didn't trust them anymore, not one bit. 2 nights later, I woke to the smell of smoke. I stumbled out of bed, heart pounding, and saw the glow from the barn windows. My throat tightened. Fire. I grabbed a bucket from the porch, but by the time I got there, the flames were licking high at the rafters. My daughter stood near the door, a red can at her feet. "Gasoline. What in God's name are you doing?" I screamed, the bucket slipping from my hands. She froze, her face caught in the firelight. For a moment, she looked like a stranger. Her features twisted in something I couldn't name. "Mama," she stammered, "this is for your own good. Those papers, they'll ruin everything." I lunged past her, coughing from the smoke, and pulled open the barn door. The folder. I had left it on the workbench after double-checking it earlier that day. The flames were creeping closer. With a rag pressed over my mouth, I dashed inside, the heat searing my skin. My eyes watered as I grabbed the folder, clutching it to my chest. I stumbled out, gasping for air, while my daughter shouted behind me, her voice shrill with panic. "Why, Mama? Why are you making this so hard?" I collapsed on the grass, hugging the folder tight even as the barn groaned and crackled behind me. Neighbors must have seen the flames because before long, headlights cut through the smoke and men came running with hoses and buckets. The fire was doused before the whole place went up, but the rafters were charred, black scars against the night sky. When the smoke cleared, my daughter was gone. She had slipped away into the dark, leaving the gasoline can behind. I sat there shivering, though the heat of the fire still clung to my skin. The folder in my lap was smudged but safe. The signatures were still visible, the words still legible. My proof had survived, but barely. Neighbors patted my back, asking if I was all right, if I knew what had caused the fire. I just nodded, unable to speak. How could I tell them my own daughter had tried to burn away my history? When they left, I went back inside the house. My knees ached as I climbed the stairs, but I didn't stop until I had hidden the folder again. This time deep in the cedar chest where I keep family quilts. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the trunk. My heart felt heavy, bruised. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about blood, about family tearing itself apart. I thought of my husband again, of how proud he had been to raise children here on this soil. What would he say now if he saw them treating it like a stack of dollar bills? The barn smelled of ash for weeks, a reminder of what nearly happened. Every time I passed it, I felt the sting of betrayal cut deeper. My daughter had crossed a line, and I knew without a doubt this was no longer just a disagreement. It was war. The morning after the fire, I woke with smoke still clinging to my hair, and the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. My daughter hadn't come back, not even to check if I was alive. That told me everything I needed to know. My children weren't going to stop. If I wanted to save the land, I needed someone who knew how to fight on paper, in courtrooms, not just in barns and kitchens. I thought of Earl again, my old neighbor, who always seemed to know somebody. When I called him, my voice still raspy, he said, "Ruth, there's a young lawyer in town. Specializes in environmental cases. Name's Daniel Price. He's not like the others. Still believes in the law." I hesitated. Lawyers, in my mind, were for rich folks with yachts and divorces. But I had no choice now. Daniel came by that afternoon. Tall, maybe in his 30s, with a kind face and sleeves rolled up like he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He listened without interrupting as I laid out everything. The whispers on the porch, the fake contract, Earl's newspaper, the fire, and finally the folder itself. When I set the brittle papers before him, his eyes widened. He leaned close, reading line by line. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, "if this contract is authentic, you're sitting on a shield. Developers can't touch a protected conservation zone without years of legal wrangling. This isn't just some dusty relic. It's the kind of thing that could stop them cold." My hands trembled against the mug of coffee I held. "But it's damaged. They'll say it's worthless." He nodded slowly. "That's why we'll need a duplicate. Government copies, archived records. The original file should be in the city archives." I felt something tighten in my chest, fear, yes, but also hope. "Then we go there?" He gave me a steady look. "We go tomorrow." The next morning, I put on my best dress, the one I usually saved for church. I brushed my hair, pinned it back, and slipped the folder into my bag, wrapped in a towel so the papers wouldn't tear. Daniel drove me in his old sedan, the hum of the engine steady as we left the open fields and rolled toward the city skyline. It had been years since I'd set foot downtown. The streets were a blur of glass towers and honking horns. All I could think was how quickly the world had changed, pressing in closer and closer to my farm. The city archives sat in a limestone building, its steps worn smooth by decades of feet. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polish, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without thinking. Rows of cabinets stretched on like a maze. A clerk with sharp glasses led us to the records room. Daniel gave her the parcel number and date, 1973. She nodded and went off, her heels clicking against the tile. I clutched my bag tight, whispering, "Do you think they'll still have it?" Daniel smiled faintly. "They should. Government keeps everything. It's just a matter of time." Minutes passed. Then the clerk returned, her face blank. "I'm sorry. Those files are missing." My stomach dropped. "Missing?" She adjusted her glasses. "We had a water leak a few years back. Some boxes were damaged. Others simply misplaced. That parcel's file isn't here." I felt the blood drain from my face. All those shelves, miles of paper, and mine, my one lifeline, gone. Daniel pressed her gently. "Are you certain? These are state-protected lands. There should be microfilm, digital copies, something." She shook her head, almost rehearsed. "We've checked. I'm afraid there's nothing." I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My legs wobbled and I gripped the table to stay upright. First my children, now the government's own records. It felt like the walls were closing in. Daniel guided me outside, his hand steady on my elbow. The city buzzed around us, indifferent. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. On the ride home, I stared out the window at the passing concrete and glass. My voice finally broke the silence. "It's gone. All of it. They've erased it. Daniel shook his head firmly. Not erased. Buried. Someone doesn't want that file found. And that means it matters. I looked at him, searching his face. You think someone did this on purpose? His jaw tightened. Developers don't spend hundreds of millions without greasing palms. I've seen it before. Someone in City Hall is helping them. I clutched my bag to my chest, the fragile folder inside. My one copy barely holding together. And now I understood. This wasn't just about greedy children anymore. I was up against something bigger: money, influence, people in suits who could make whole files vanish. The car rattled over a bump, but I barely noticed. My land was still mine, but the fight had grown teeth. I thought of my husband again. Of how he'd laughed once when I told him the soil under our boots was the only bank account we'd ever need. Maybe he'd been right. But now I would need more than memories. I would need allies. And I had just found my first one. The day after our failed trip to the archives, Daniel came back to the farm. He parked in the gravel drive, dust swirling around his car, and walked up the porch with his sleeves rolled high like he meant business. I made a few calls last night, he said as soon as I let him in. His eyes were sharp, different from the gentle patience he'd shown before. And you were right to be suspicious. That file didn't disappear by accident. I poured us both coffee, though my hands shook as I set the cups down. What did you find? He leaned forward. 2 weeks ago, a council aide authorized a file transfer from the archives. Your parcel number was included. The request didn't come from the conservation department. It came from a private law firm, the same one representing the developers. My stomach nodded. So they've got it. He nodded grimly. They wanted to erase the record before you even knew it existed. I pressed my hands flat on the table, the wood warm under my palms. Then it's not just my children. No, he said softly. It's bigger. Money's flowing through City Hall like a river, and anyone standing in the way gets swept aside. You, Mrs. Miller, are standing in the way. The words chilled me. I thought of my son sliding those forged papers across the kitchen table, my daughter with the gas can in the barn, and now faceless men in suits pulling strings behind the scenes. For a moment I felt very small. Just an old woman with a brittle folder and memories. But then I thought of the land, the oak tree where my husband rested, the creek that still ran clear in spring. No, I wasn't small. I was the one holding the last line. Daniel watched me carefully. We'll need more proof. The copy you found is important, but if we can track down anyone tied to that original agreement, witnesses, signers, will have something solid. Something they can't burn or hide. I nodded, clutching my cup. There was a name on it. An official's signature. He pulled out a notepad. Let's start there. The next days blurred into a quiet storm of effort. Daniel spent hours making calls, chasing leads, filing requests. I stayed home, sorting through every drawer, trunk, and box, hoping I'd overlooked something. Old receipts, letters, tax forms. I pored over them until my eyes ached. At night I barely slept. The sound of the wind in the barn rafters reminded me of fire. Every creak in the house set me on edge, like someone might be creeping up the porch to steal the folder while I dozed. One afternoon, while Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his phone pressed to his ear, I asked, "Why are you helping me, really? You're young. You could have better cases than an old woman fighting her children." He set the phone down and looked at me square. Because they think they can scare you into silence. Because this isn't just about you. It's about how easily truth can be buried when enough money's at stake. And because I don't like bullies. Something in his voice steadied me. Maybe I wasn't fighting alone after all. But the pressure was mounting. One evening I found a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, just folded paper. 4 words written in neat block letters. Stop or lose everything. My knees nearly gave out. I sat in the hall, staring at the note, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The handwriting wasn't my children's. This was from someone else. Someone who wanted me quiet. When I showed it to Daniel the next morning, his jaw clenched. They're trying to rattle you. Don't let them. He tucked the note into his briefcase. This proves we're on the right track. If you were no threat, they wouldn't bother. Still, it was hard not to look over my shoulder after that. A week later, Daniel called me with news. You're not going to believe this, he said, excitement cutting through the fatigue in his voice. The man who signed your contract, he's still alive. Retired years ago, living in a nursing home outside the city. For the first time in days, my heart leapt. Alive. Yes. If we can get his testimony, it changes everything. They can't argue with the man who signed it. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached. Then we find him. But as I hung up, a shiver ran through me. If Daniel could track him down, so could the developers. And if they were willing to strip files from archives, what else might they do to keep the truth buried? I stood at the window, staring out at the fields glowing gold in the late sun. The land looked peaceful, but I knew better now. There was a war brewing, and the battlefield wasn't just soil. It was paper, signatures, and secrets. And I wasn't just fighting my children anymore. I was fighting the city itself. The drive to the nursing home took nearly an hour. Daniel did the steering while I sat with the folder pressed against my lap like a child clutching a schoolbook. Outside the window, the city gave way to tired suburbs, then to the quieter roads lined with maple trees just starting to turn. I tried not to think about what would happen if this meeting went wrong. The home itself was plain, brick walls with white trim. A little flower bed out front that someone clearly tried hard to keep cheerful. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and oatmeal. People moved slowly through the hallways in wheelchairs, some staring blankly, others nodding as we passed. The receptionist looked up when Daniel gave the name. Mr. Harold Keating? She repeated, adjusting her glasses. Yes, he's still here. Room 212, end of the hall. I felt my heart thump as we walked. The folder in my arm seemed to grow heavier with each step. When we reached the room, Daniel knocked gently. A voice, thin but steady, called, "Come in." The man inside was older than I expected. Well into his 90s, his skin as fragile as paper. But his eyes, sharp blue, still held a spark. He sat in a chair by the window, a blanket over his legs. "Mr. Keating," Daniel said, his voice respectful. "This is Mrs. Miller. She owns farmland just outside the city. We believe you may have signed a document involving her land back in the 70s. Keating tilted his head, studying me. "Farmland," he repeated. "I signed a lot of things in those years." "Which one?" I stepped forward, hands trembling as I pulled the folder from my bag. "This one," I said softly, laying the brittle pages across his lap. His gnarled fingers brushed the paper, tracing the faded ink. For a moment he was quiet. Then he gave a low chuckle. "I'll be damned. I haven't seen this in decades." My breath caught. "It's real then." "Oh, it's real," he said firmly, tapping the signature at the bottom. "That's mine. I was deputy director of conservation back then. We designated this land protected because of the wetlands and bird nesting grounds. Developers wanted it even then, but the science was clear, it had to stay untouched." I felt tears sting my eyes. All the sleepless nights, the fear, the smoke of the barn. It hadn't been for nothing. "So it's still valid?" Keating leaned back, sighing. "Legally? Yes. But don't think they won't fight you on it. The men behind this project have money, and money finds ways to twist the law. They'll drag you into court, paint you as senile, unfit, maybe even worse. They won't stop until you're worn down." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the chair beside me. "They'd drag me into court?" His eyes softened, though his voice stayed blunt. "Mrs. Miller, you've stepped into a storm. But storms can be weathered, especially if you've got allies." He glanced at Daniel and gave a nod. You chose the right one here. Daniel smiled faintly but didn't interrupt. Keating leaned closer. I'll give you my statement. Written, signed, notarized if need be. They can't erase the past, not while I'm breathing. I wanted to hug him then, but I settled for placing my hand gently over his. His skin was thin but his grip was strong. Thank you, I whispered. On the drive home I stared out at the fields rolling past, my heart a tangle of relief and fear. The contract was real, and I had the man himself to back it up. But his warning echoed in my mind. They'll drag you into court. Daniel must have sensed my worry. Don't let it scare you, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. It means we have something worth fighting for. And if they want a fight, we'll give it to them. I nodded, though my hands stayed tight in my lap. I thought of my children again. Their whispers, their hungry eyes. What would they do when they found out I had proof stronger than paper? That night I placed the folder back in the trunk, locking it with the little brass key I now kept on a chain around my neck. Then I sat by the window watching the moon rise over the fields. Somewhere out there, owls called in the dark, the same as they had since my husband first tilled this soil. I whispered into the night, I won't let them take it. Not while I'm alive. The words felt heavy like a vow. And deep down, I knew the storm was only just beginning. By the time Daniel and I drove back from seeing Mr. Keating, I knew hiding in the shadows wasn't enough anymore. My children had tried to trick me, burn me out, and strip me of my rights. The developers had stolen files, whispered threats, and left me notes at my own doorstep. If they were going to bury me, they'd have to do it in daylight. Daniel, I said as we pulled into my driveway, I want people to know. Not just judges or lawyers, everyone. If they want to shame me, let them try with the whole town watching. He gave me a long look, then nodded. Public pressure. Media. It's risky, they'll come after you harder. But it might be the only way to stop this. The next morning, Daniel called a journalist he trusted. A young woman named Claire who worked for the state paper. She came out to the farm that afternoon, a tape recorder in her hand, her hair pulled back and her eyes sharp as hawks. I wasn't sure how to begin. My voice trembled at first, but once I started talking, the words poured out. I told her about the land, how my husband and I had worked it, how our children grew up in its fields. I told her about overhearing the whispers on the porch, about the fake contract my son shoved across the table, about my daughter with the gasoline can in the barn. And then, when the weight of it all pressed too heavy, I slid the folder across the table. This is the truth, I said. Signed by the state in 1973. They can try to erase it, but it's real. Claire's eyes widened as she read, her fingers brushing the brittle pages. If this checks out, she said, this isn't just a story. It's a scandal. Daniel added the final piece. Mr. Keating's sworn statement, fresh with his signature and the nursing home's notary stamp. Claire's face tightened with excitement. This changes everything. I'll need photos. Old ones if you've got them. I pulled out albums, dust rising from their covers. Photos of the land in spring, the creek flowing, wild geese nesting in the reeds. Photos of my husband in the fields, of my children as toddlers chasing fireflies. Claire snapped picture after picture, capturing not just the land but the life tied to it. When she left, I felt lighter, though fear still gnawed at me. By handing her that folder, I'd taken a leap. There was no turning back. The article hit the papers 3 days later. The headline stretched across the front page. Protected land at center of $200 million development deal. Beneath it was my picture. Me standing in front of the oak tree with the barn smoldered behind me. Folder clutched in my hands. The story laid it all bare. The missing city files, the conservation contract, Keating's testimony, and the developer's rush to build on forbidden ground. The town buzzed. Neighbors came by, some with casseroles, some just to pat my arm and say, "We're with you, Ruth." The phone rang nonstop, reporters from radio and television asking for interviews. I even saw my own face on the evening news, my voice shaky but firm as I told them, "This land isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." But not everyone was pleased. My children stormed in that evening, their faces red, voices sharp. "How could you do this to us?" my son shouted, slamming his fist against the kitchen table. "Do you have any idea what you've ruined?" I stood tall, even as my knees trembled. "I ruined nothing. You tried to sell what was never yours to give. This land is more than money. It's legacy. It's ours." My daughter's eyes burned. "You'll regret this, Mama. You think people are on your side? Wait until the lawyers tear you apart." They stormed out, their car roaring down the lane. I stood by the window, clutching the curtain, my chest tight. The children I once nursed and raised had become my enemies. Yet I couldn't falter now. Within a week, the state announced an investigation. The article had stirred too much attention to ignore. Protesters showed up outside City Hall carrying signs. "Protect our land. No deals in the dark." Environmental groups sent letters of support. Even strangers from other towns mailed me notes. "Stay strong, Grandma. We're rooting for you." For the first time since this began, I felt like the weight wasn't mine alone to carry. The land had a voice now, loud enough to echo beyond my kitchen walls. Daniel stopped by one evening, exhaustion written all over his face but a smile tugging at his lips. "They've halted the permits," he said. "Officially declared a freeze until the investigation's done." I sank into my chair, tears spilling freely. The bulldozers would not come. Least not yet. I thought of my husband, of his hands in the soil, of his promise that the land would outlive us. And for the first time in months, I let myself believe he'd been right. The battle wasn't over, but the ground beneath me felt steady again. The headlines faded after a few weeks, but the impact lingered. The investigation wrapped quickly, and the state issued its ruling. The contract was valid. The land was officially confirmed as a protected zone. Bulldozers would never touch my fields. The developers pulled out, their glossy signs taken down, their lawyers vanishing as fast as they'd come. The land was safe. But my family? That was another matter. My children stopped visiting. No more cars crunching up the gravel drive. No more grandchildren tumbling onto the porch with sticky hands and loud laughter. The silence stretched long. I told myself I'd grown used to it, but in truth, it cut deeper than any stranger's betrayal. One evening, I saw my son at the grocery store. He passed me in the aisle without a word. Just a hard glance that sliced through me like glass. My daughter hasn't called since that night in the barn. The distance between us feels wider than the miles of city highways. I sit most evenings by the window, watching the fields turn gold at dusk. The oak tree still stands tall, the same one shading my husband's resting place. The creek still runs in spring. The birds still circle overhead. The land holds steady as if nothing happened. But I know better. The community has stepped in where my children stepped out. Neighbors bring pies and casseroles. Church folks stop by to check on me. Even strangers send letters still. "Bless you for protecting what matters." Their kindness warms me, but it can't quite fill the empty chairs at my table. One Sunday after church, Earl clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, Ruth. Folks will remember this for years." I smiled, but it was thin. What good is saving land if it costs you your family? And yet, when I walk the fields at dawn, dew wetting the hem of my skirt, I feel a strange pride rise in me. My husband's voice echoes in memory. "This land will outlive us." I kept that promise. Not for money, not for towers or highways, but for the soil itself, for the history stitched into every furrow. I didn't win riches. I didn't win back the love of my children. But I won the right to choose, and I chose the land. The papers sit locked away now, safe and dry. Sometimes I open the trunk not to read them, but just to remind myself they're still there, like a guard standing watch. The barn still bears its scars, blackened beams a reminder of what was nearly lost. I thought about fixing it, but I've left it as is. A wound, yes, but also a warning. I've learned something in all this, though it wasn't the lesson I wanted. Money can twist blood ties until they snap. But land holds steady. It doesn't lie, it doesn't scheme. It waits, quiet and patient, for someone to love it enough to fight. So I tend my garden. I walk the rows. I rest my hand against the oak and whisper to my husband that we did it, even if it hurt. And at night, when the house is quiet, I remind myself, the true value was never in the millions dangled before me. It was here all along, in legacy, in memory, in the freedom to stand firm when everyone else tried to push me down. Yes, victory came bitter. But it was still victory. And the land, our land, remains ours. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.